The sound of metal snapping shut echoed through the mall. Handcuffs cut deep into a teenage girl's wrists. Blood dripped onto the polished floor. The crowd froze in silence, then burst into mocking laughter when the 16-year-old whispered, "My mom is Delta Force." The officer smirked, leaning closer. "Delta Force? Kid, there are no heroes here." But he was wrong. Dead wrong. Because just beyond those glass doors, a woman was already walking in. No uniform, no weapons, only the kind of authority forged in battlefields, and the fury of a mother who will stop at nothing. So let me ask you, what happens when the storm isn't a metaphor, but a mother? The echo of the handcuffs still lingers in your mind, the metallic snap reverberating like a warning bell. That was the Atlanta, Georgia. Early spring. The air outside the Westfield Mall carried the sharp bite of lingering winter, mixed with the first hopeful warmth of a southern March afternoon. Dogwood trees lined the parking lots, their branches tipped with pale blossoms that trembled gently in the breeze. Shoppers streamed in and out of the automatic glass doors, their laughter and conversations blending into the steady hum of suburban life. Inside, the mall was alive with neon lights, polished tile floors, and the mingled aromas of pretzels, coffee, and cologne. It was, by all appearances, an ordinary Saturday. But for Zoe Manning, this day was not ordinary. 16 years old, with sharp brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail, Zoe was the kind of teenager who carried herself with quiet determination. Her NASA t-shirt wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a declaration of her dreams. She had posters of rocket launches plastered across her bedroom wall, and her notebooks overflowed with sketches of solar energy panels and biochemical formulas. To her classmates, she was the science girl, the one who aced every test and stayed late to tutor others. But behind her calm exterior lived a young woman constantly aware of how others saw her. Too young, too ambitious, too black in a world that often judged first and asked questions later. Her mother, Colonel Vanessa Manning, was even harder to ignore. The first black woman to serve in Delta Force, she had built a career out of breaking barriers and walking straight into fires that others fled. Decades of service had carved a quiet steel into her posture and a piercing authority into her voice. At the Pentagon, generals listened when she spoke. Yet, at home, she was simply Mom, the woman who braided Zoe's hair, corrected her chemistry homework, and reminded her to keep her sneakers tied. For all her military accolades, Vanessa's proudest achievement was the daughter who now walked the tiled floors of the mall electronics store, carefully comparing capacitors for a school project. The mall itself felt like a stage waiting for a performance. Bright overhead lights shimmered against the glass counters of Electromax, the upscale electronics shop nestled between a luxury handbag boutique and a gourmet chocolate store. A dozen TV screens played muted commercials, their images flickering across Zoe's face as she browsed the shelves. The buzz of fluorescent bulbs merged with the low thrum of distant escalators. Ordinary sounds, yet within them, the seeds of tension already stirred, because not everyone saw Zoe for who she was. The store clerk, a balding man named Garrett Wilson, watched her with thinly veiled suspicion. His eyes tracked her every move, his lips pursed as though he expected trouble. Each time Zoe picked up a package, he adjusted his tie and shuffled closer, straightening items she hadn't touched. To him, the sight of a young black girl alone in an expensive store meant only one thing: risk. It didn't matter that she carried a detailed shopping list or that her school ID dangled clearly from her lanyard. To him, she was already guilty of something unnamed. In another corner of the store, Karen Thompson clutched her designer purse with manicured hands. Her highlighted hair gleamed under the lights, and her voice carried the sharpness of someone accustomed to being heard. She was the kind of woman who could summon a manager with a raised eyebrow and expected apologies before she demanded them. That afternoon, as she rifled through her bag, she decided her missing phone must have been stolen. And when her eyes landed on Zoe, the girl in the NASA shirt, the one the clerk had been shadowing, her suspicion hardened into certainty. Outside the store, the mall pulsed with ordinary life. Teenagers snapping selfies near the fountain, couples sipping lattes, families balancing shopping bags. Yet, within Electromax, a different story was being written, one that would soon pull in police officers, military leaders, and news crews. But let's slow down because, before the storm, There was the quiet weight of history pressing invisibly on Zoe's shoulders. She had been raised on lessons of caution. Her mother had taught her how to speak politely, but firmly if ever questioned, how to keep her hands visible, how to remember that respect could sometimes mean survival. "The world may not always see you for who you are," Vanessa would say, "but you must always know who you are." These words had become Zoe's armor, an invisible shield she carried everywhere. That day, though, armor wasn't enough. When Officer James Reeves arrived in his crisp Atlanta PD uniform, his presence filled the small security office like a storm cloud. Tall, with cold blue eyes and a practiced smirk, Reeves embodied authority gone unchecked. He didn't see a straight A student. He didn't see the daughter of a decorated military officer. He saw only a suspect who fit his expectations. He asked no questions, demanded no evidence. And when Zoe quietly insisted on her innocence, he cut her off with the weight of 20 years of prejudice disguised as experience. "I've heard it all before," he muttered. It is in these moments, the seconds before injustice crashes down, that the stage of conflict is set. You see, the story isn't just about one girl or one officer or one phone. It's about how centuries of bias can condense into a single moment, a single accusation, a single pair of handcuffs closing too tightly on young wrists. And yet, beyond the mall walls, another force was already moving. Colonel Vanessa Manning sat in a Pentagon briefing room, her attention fixed on maps and satellite images. But when her phone buzzed with Zoe's number, she felt the shift instantly. For all her years of military discipline, nothing could mute the instincts of motherhood. The moment she heard her daughter's voice, tight with fear yet steady with courage, she knew the situation was dire, and she knew exactly what she would do. In that instant, two worlds collided, the sterile corridors of military power and the brightly lit halls of a suburban shopping center. The colonel who had faced hostile fire on foreign soil would now face hostility of a different kind, on her own home turf. The mother who had taught her daughter how to survive would now have to show the world why that lesson was necessary. Around them, other characters circled like shadows preparing to step into the light. Major Terrence Williams, Vanessa's longtime ally and military attorney, was already on his way. Captain Elena Rodriguez, military police and loyal friend, had received the call to bring medical support. Even Chief Garcia of the Atlanta Police, though not yet present, would soon be pulled into the unfolding drama. Each of them, knowingly or not, was about to play a role in a conflict that began with a single false accusation. But let's not forget Zoe herself. Sitting in that chair, wrists raw from the cuffs, she embodied both vulnerability and defiance. The humiliation of being paraded through the mall pressed on her like a weight, yet inside, she held a spark that refused to be extinguished. It was the same spark her teachers saw when she explained complex equations, the same spark her classmates admired when she spoke up against unfair grading, the same spark her mother had nurtured all her life. That spark was now surrounded by darkness, but it would not go out. As the mall security office buzzed with accusations and indifference, as Reeves tightened his grip on authority he did not deserve, as Karen Thompson rehearsed her victimhood in her mind, a greater story was quietly assembling itself. Outside, the shoppers had no idea. But soon, cameras would roll, voices would rise, and what began as an ordinary Saturday would ignite into something viral, something unforgettable. And so, the stage is set. Zoe, the honor student mistaken for a thief. Vanessa, the Delta Force mother racing against time. Reeves, the officer blinded by prejudice. Karen, the accuser whose lies would unravel. And a mall, ordinary and unremarkable, about to become the crucible of truth. This was the calm before the storm, the breath before the shout, the heartbeat before the explosion. And just when the tension seemed unbearable, something unexpected slipped into the cracks of this heavy story. Because even in the darkest moments, life has a way of twisting, of surprising us, of catching us off guard, which is where our tale moves next, into conflict, into confrontation, into a scene that is as absurd as it is terrifying. The universe didn't deliver silence, it delivered irony. Just as the security office buzzed with whispered accusations and stiff authority, the sound of a ringtone sliced through the tension. Not just any ringtone, the cheerful, unmistakable jingle of a default iPhone alert. Heads turned like synchronized dancers in a bizarre choreography. And there, glowing brightly from inside Karen Thompson's designer purse, was the missing phone she had sworn Zoe had stolen. For a split second, the entire room froze, suspended between disbelief and hilarity. It was the kind of pause that comedians live for, the silence before the punchline. And then Zoe, with her wrists still raw and bleeding, tilted her head and muttered under her breath, "Wow, world record for losing and finding a phone. Somebody call Guinness." The humor was dry, almost too quiet to catch, but it cut through the air sharper than any blade. A chuckle bubbled up from one of the younger security guards before he quickly smothered it, earning a glare from Officer Reeves. Karen's face drained of color, then flushed beet red. This is ridiculous," she stammered, fumbling for excuses. "I must have, overlooked it. Yes, an honest mistake." An honest mistake, Zoe thought, though her lips curled in a half-smile. Honest mistakes usually don't come with handcuffs and bleeding wrists. That was the absurdity of it all. Here was a straight-A student, detained, humiliated, injured, while the real victim had been carrying her own phone the entire time. But irony rarely arrives alone. It usually brings friends, because just as Karen tried to stuff the phone back into her purse, like a magician hiding a rabbit, the mall's PA system crackled overhead. "Attention shoppers, due to unforeseen circumstances, security footage review will be temporarily delayed. Please remain patient." The words seemed harmless, bureaucratic even, but Zoe caught the nervous glance exchanged between Garrett Wilson, the store manager, and Officer Reeves. Something was off. If the mall suddenly wanted to delay reviewing security footage, it probably wasn't because the popcorn machine broke down. "Interesting timing," Zoe muttered again. "Phones magically reappear and cameras conveniently go blind. What's next? Alien abduction?" Even through the sting of pain, humor became her shield. If she didn't laugh, she might cry. And crying in front of Officer Reeves felt like handing him a victory he didn't deserve. The absurdity deepened when Reeves cleared his throat, clearly trying to bulldoze past Karen's embarrassing ringtone. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he barked, his voice a shade higher than usual. "A phone ringing in her purse doesn't mean anything. Could be interference." The room collectively blinked. Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Interference? What is this, Area 51? The younger security guard coughed hard into his sleeve, this time unable to disguise his laugh. Reeves shot him a look so sharp it could peel paint. And yet, beneath the humor, the stakes grew heavier. If Reeves and Wilson were willing to ignore evidence this obvious, what else might they hide? What else might they twist to keep their story intact? That's when Zoe noticed something. On the wall monitor, a feed from one of the security cameras flickered. For half a second, she caught sight of Karen deliberately slipping her phone into her bag earlier. Then, static. The feed cut out. Her pulse quickened. There it was, the truth, caught on tape. But someone was trying to erase it. If they succeed, Zoe thought, I'm not just the girl accused today. I'm the girl who couldn't prove her innocence. And that follows you forever. That realization hit like a punch to the gut. Her future, college applications, scholarships, her entire dream of becoming a researcher could all collapse under one false narrative. So when Reeves leaned casually against the table, pretending the bleeding on her wrist didn't exist, Zoe leaned back and fired her first real shot. "You know," she said, voice steady, "in my chemistry lab, we call this contamination of evidence. You should try it sometime. Very educational." Even Garrett Wilson shifted uncomfortably. Reeves narrowed his eyes, but the jab had landed. Still, Zoe understood the bigger picture now. This wasn't just about her. This was about a system where losing your phone could turn into a weapon against the wrong person. About a mall where cameras suddenly glitched at the exact wrong moment. About an officer who laughed at a girl bleeding in cuffs. The conflict was no longer simply her humiliation. It was proof, or the lack of it. It was truth, or the erasure of it. And that raised the stakes higher than ever. Because if she couldn't hold on to the truth, everything else might slip away. Her record, her safety, even her mother's reputation once Vanessa arrived. After all, What would the world say if a decorated Delta Force officer's daughter was labeled a thief? The irony was unbearable, and yet irony had more twists in store. Just as Zoe's thoughts spiraled, the door creaked open, and in walked Major Terrence Williams, JAG attorney and Vanessa's trusted friend. His uniform pressed, his briefcase sharp, he carried himself with a calm confidence that seemed to fill the room. "Colonel Manning sends her regards," he said smoothly, locking eyes with Reeves, "and she'd like to know why her daughter is bleeding in your custody." The silence that followed was delicious. If tension had a flavor, it would have been sweet, like victory laced with sarcasm. Reeves opened his mouth, then closed it again, like a goldfish caught in a tank too small. Zoe couldn't help herself. "Careful, officer. You might choke on your words." That tiny flash of humor, biting, perfectly timed, wasn't just for her. It was for everyone in the room who needed to see that she wasn't broken, not yet. But the man with the briefcase wasn't just delivering intimidation. He had information, and information, in moments like these, was dynamite. Williams placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents detailing multiple complaints against Officer Reeves, complaints eerily similar to Zoe's situation. Cases where evidence vanished, where suspects just happened to fit a certain description, where no accountability followed. The room tilted. Suddenly, the conflict wasn't just Zoe versus Reeves. It was Zoe versus a pattern hidden beneath years of silence. And once a pattern is exposed, the story is never small again. Zoe's mind spun. If her case connected to others, then her fight wasn't just about saving her future. It was about unraveling something much bigger. Maybe even something her mother had been preparing her for all along. Still, humor clung to her lips like oxygen. "Looks like I'm not the first," she murmured, glancing at Reeves, "but maybe I'll be the last." The stakes were now towering. If this evidence held, Reeves's career could crumble, the mall could face lawsuits, and Karen's smug arrogance could implode spectacularly. But if it failed, if it was buried, erased, or dismissed, then Zoe would carry scars, not just on her wrists, but on her entire life. The absurdity of it all pressed down on her until it almost felt funny. Almost. Because sometimes humor is just the thinnest line between despair and defiance. And Zoe, bruised but unbroken, had no intention of stepping back. But just when Zoe thought the worst had been exposed, the door opened again. And this time, the storm truly arrived. Colonel Vanessa Manning stepped into the room, not in camouflage fatigues, not draped in medals, but in dark jeans, a burgundy blouse, and a black blazer that did nothing to hide the unmistakable authority in her bearing. Her presence filled the cramped security office with a gravity that made every other figure seem suddenly smaller. For Zoe, the sight of her mother was a lifeline. The raw ache in her wrists, the humiliation of the cuffs, the biting sting of Reeves's laughter. All of it surged back at once. Her lips trembled, but she caught herself, straightening in her chair. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, not here, not in front of them. Vanessa's eyes swept the room with the precision of a soldier assessing a battlefield, Reeves hovering with false confidence, Karen shrinking into her seat, Wilson trying not to meet her gaze, and Zoe, her daughter, her child, sitting wounded, restrained, yet dignified. The sight cut deeper than any injury Vanessa had ever sustained in combat. She had faced enemy fire, mortar blasts, missions where survival hung by a thread, but nothing had ever felt as excruciating as seeing her daughter bleed because of contempt dressed up as procedure. Her voice was calm, but every syllable carried steel. "Remove those cuffs, now." Reeves smirked, though the edges of his confidence had already begun to fray. "Ma'am, your daughter is being detained. Procedure—" Vanessa cut him off with the kind of authority generals obeyed without question. "Your procedure is bleeding onto her skin." The silence afterward was suffocating. Even the air conditioner seemed to hesitate before humming again. Zoe looked down at her wrists, then up at her mother. There was something terrifying and beautiful in Vanessa's composure. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't threatening. She was simply stating fact after fact, each one slicing through the lies in the room. Inside Zoe's chest, emotions collided. Relief, pride, and a sharp stab of fear. because she knew her mother well enough to recognize the storm behind her calm. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about justice, reputation, and a lifetime of battles fought in uniform and out of it. Vanessa moved closer, her hand brushing briefly across Zoe's shoulder. That single touch spoke volumes. I see you. I'm here. You're safe. And yet, Zoe could feel her own doubts gnawing. What if Reeves doubled down? What if the evidence disappeared completely? What if this humiliation was something no one could erase? Even with her mother in the room, the weight of those questions pressed down like chains. Reeves finally snapped the cuffs open with a clatter. Zoe's wrist throbbed, and for the first time she could flex her hands. The freedom felt both liberating and fragile, as though it could be snatched away again at any moment. That moment, the cuffs falling away, was the pivot point. Everything balanced on what happened next. Major Williams cleared his throat, presenting the file of complaints against Reeves. His voice was calm, factual, relentless. Each word dug deeper into the image Reeves tried to maintain. The officer's face flushed red, then pale, then red again. Zoe watched him carefully. There was something almost surreal about seeing the man who had mocked her suddenly stripped of authority, his power unraveling like a thread pulled too far. And yet, the satisfaction was tangled with unease, because she understood something chilling. If not for her mother's rank, her connections, her lawyer friend, she might still be bleeding in cuffs, her voice dismissed, her truth buried. That realization sank into her bones. How many others had sat in this same chair without anyone to speak for them? How many stories had ended not with exposure, but with silence? Her chest tightened. For a moment, the laughter of the crowd outside the security office blurred with the ringing in her ears. She wanted to scream, to tear the whole system apart. Instead, she breathed, steady and controlled, just as her mother had taught her. Vanessa's voice broke the silence again. "Show the footage," Wilson stammered. The system's experiencing technical. Show the footage." This time, the demand was not just a mother's plea, it was an order, a command honed on battlefields. The monitor flickered, static buzzing, then resolved into shaky footage. And there it was, Karen Thompson, slipping her phone into her bag, glancing around, then theatrically claiming it missing minutes later. The room held its breath. Karen's excuses shriveled on her lips. Reeves looked away. Zoe, for the first time that day, allowed herself to exhale fully. Vindication. Proof. Not words, not persuasion. Evidence. But the relief was short-lived, because even as the truth flashed on screen, Zoe's mind spiraled deeper. This wasn't just about one phone. It wasn't just about her. It was about a pattern, about years of being watched, doubted, accused, about a world where innocence wasn't enough. And in that thought came the real conflict. Was she strong enough to carry this beyond herself? Or was she just a girl who wanted to go home and forget? Her heart pounded. Her mother's presence gave her strength, but it also raised the stakes. This wasn't only her fight. It was theirs. It was everyone's. The intensity in the room grew unbearable. Karen's husband stormed in, spitting threats about lawsuits. Reeves bristled, his hand hovering near his weapon out of habit, his pride collapsing but not gone. The mall manager sweated, mumbling about protocols and misunderstandings. Every voice was noise, every excuse a mask. And through it all, Zoe sat in the center, her wrists bandaged, her pulse racing. She had never felt so small and yet so powerful, because she realized they were all watching her. The cameras outside, the lawyers inside, her mother standing strong at her side. They were waiting for what she would do, what she would say. The fear pressed hard. What if I fail them? What if I break? But another voice rose stronger. What if I don't? It was in that moment that Zoe chose. She chose not to shrink, not to hide. She lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. I want to stay. I want to see this through. The words settled over the room like a verdict. For Vanessa, they were both a dagger and a crown. Painful to hear, but proof her daughter had become everything she had raised her to be. The stakes were no longer theoretical. They were personal. If Zoe faltered, she would lose more than dignity. She could lose her future, her safety, even the foundation of trust between mother and daughter. But if she carried this weight, she could change more than her own story. She could change the system itself. The noise outside the office grew louder. Protesters, reporters, voices swelling into a chorus demanding justice. Inside, the tension reached its breaking point. Reeves, cornered, made his final mistake. His voice cracked with anger as he pointed at Vanessa. "You're interfering with police business. I could place you under arrest." The absurdity was almost comic, but the danger was real. Vanessa stepped forward, unflinching, her voice calm but deadly. "Try." The silence that followed was electric. No one moved, no one breathed, and in that stillness, Zoe felt the full weight of the moment. This was it, the peak, the crucible, everything that had led her here, every lesson, every injustice, every humiliation. It all crystallized into a single truth. She was not just a victim. She was a witness. She was a voice. Her hands still ached. Her heart still pounded. But her resolve was unshakable. Then, quiet. A pause before the storm shifted again. For the first time all day, the room seemed to exhale. The shouting subsided. Even Reeves's fury faltered. It was the fragile silence that comes only at the height of chaos. A silence so loud it demanded listening. And it was in that silence that the story prepared to tip, to move from confrontation into resolution. The silence shattered. Reporters' voices exploded outside the mall office, flashes from cameras strobing through the glass. Protesters chanted, the echo ricocheting off the polished tiles like drumbeats in a war zone. Inside, chaos broke free. Reeves lunged forward, desperate to seize control of a story already slipping through his fingers. Vanessa blocked him with one steady step, her body language louder than words. "You will not touch her again." Zoe stood, wrists raw, bandages stark against her skin. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "The footage doesn't lie, but you do." The crowd roared as though the walls themselves amplified her defiance. Reporters shoved microphones forward. Security guards fumbled, torn between obedience and fear. Karen shrank deeper into her chair, her purse clutched like a shield already cracked. Shouts, flashbulbs, Reeves's furious denial, Vanessa's calm command. "Williams, make copies of that footage, now." The younger guard, smuggling a USB drive, his hands trembling, realizing he was part of something larger than himself. The narrative spun out like a storm, every voice pulling in different directions. Zoe could feel it, the tipping point. One wrong move, and the truth would vanish, buried under noise. But then came the sound that silenced everything. The mall's main doors slamming open. Boots pounded against the tile. A wave of uniformed officers surged in, led not by Reeves, but by Chief Garcia himself. Authority shifted in an instant. Reeves froze, his smirk evaporating. Garcia's voice carried like thunder. "Stand down, officer. Effective immediately." Reeves sputtered. "Chief, this is a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Garcia's hand sliced the air. "You cuffed a minor without probable cause, ignored evidence, and humiliated her in front of half the city. That's not misunderstanding, that's misconduct." Gasps. Cameras clicked faster. For Zoe, the moment blurred between victory and disbelief. She had imagined justice would feel clean, sharp, decisive. Instead, it felt messy, like threads pulled from a tangled web. Her chest heaved. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to collapse. Instead, she simply whispered, "It's over." But her mother's eyes told her otherwise. "No, Zoe, it's not." Because even as Reeves was escorted out, his curses echoing like the last desperate growls of a cornered animal, Vanessa knew this was only one battle in a longer war, and the war was just beginning. The footage spread within hours. Clips of Zoe's defiant words flooded social media. "The footage doesn't lie, but you do." Hashtags trended, commentators argued, strangers chose sides. To some, Zoe was a hero. To others, she was a symbol of chaos, of systems threatened. The mall tried to spin it, statements about miscommunication and isolated incidents. But the evidence was too strong, the public too enraged. and the story too human to be ignored. Zoe scrolling through her phone at midnight, thousands of messages flashing by, support, threats, encouragement, hatred. Vanessa watching from the doorway, torn between pride and dread. Karen on the evening news, crocodile tears painting her as the true victim, her words dripping poison. I only wanted to keep them all safe. The absurdity burned Zoe's throat like bile. And yet, amidst the chaos, another layer surfaced. Major Williams dug deeper into Reeves's record. The pattern wasn't coincidence. Dozens of cases, evidence mishandled, suspects targeted, complaints buried. A network of silence stretched wider than anyone had realized. The stakes soared. Because Zoe's story wasn't just about one mall, one phone, one humiliation. It was about a system infected with rot. And once you glimpse rot, you can't unsee it. The pace quickened. News vans circling the Manning home. Anonymous letters slipped under the door. Drop this or regret it. Vanessa loading her sidearm before bed, instincts honed in combat bleeding into suburbia. Zoe lying awake, her wrists throbbing, replaying the moment the cuffs bit into her skin. Wondering if her life would ever feel normal again. Humor had carried her before. But now, the jokes felt thin, the fear thicker. Still, when classmates whispered in awe at school, when strangers stopped her to thank her, she managed to smile. Because if she didn't carry the mask of courage, who would? But courage came at a cost. The twist arrived 1 week later. Major Williams uncovered a sealed file buried in the Atlanta PD archives. Inside were transcripts, internal communications linking Reeves not only to misconduct, but to a covert network of officers protecting each other. And among the names, one leapt off the page, Chief Garcia. The same man who had walked into the mall and torn Reeves down. The same man hailed as a savior by the press. The same man Zoe had almost trusted. The truth hit like a gut punch. The enemy wasn't gone. It had simply shifted masks. Vanessa's jaw clenched as she read the documents. Her soldier's instincts screamed. The battle was escalating. The lines weren't clear. Allies might be enemies, and enemies might still have power. Zoe's hands trembled as she held the papers. So it's bigger, much bigger. Vanessa met her gaze, her eyes fierce. Yes, and it means we can't stop now. The story closed not with peace, but with momentum. Zoe standing before her mirror, bandages gone, scars still red. Vanessa sharpening her resolve, military precision returning to her every move. The sealed file burning in a fireplace, only after multiple copies had been secured. The camera closing in on Zoe's face as she whispered the words that had carried her through humiliation, fear, and defiance. I'm not afraid. The world thought the story was over, but the truth lingered like smoke. Because behind every closed door, more secrets waited. Behind every smile, more lies hid. And as Zoe and Vanessa prepared for what came next, one truth crystallized above all others. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning.